This is a speculative sci-fi story about innovation, experimentation, and why understanding physics sometimes starts by questioning it. It begins the day 3 human students accidentally proved the galaxy had been asking the wrong questions about gravity. Professor Velkrin had been teaching quantum gravitational dynamics for 347 standard cycles, and in all that time, not once had the fundamental laws of physics betrayed him, until today, but he didn't know that yet. Right now he stood before his lecture hall at the Galactic Institute of Advanced Sciences, all 4 of his primary appendages gesturing enthusiastically at the holographic equations floating in the air. His carapace gleamed under the soft lighting, polished to perfection as always. Around him, students from 40 different species sat in their species-appropriate seating, taking notes through various methods ranging from neural recording to old-fashioned data tablets. These Ethrians occupied the left side of the hall, their translucent forms shimmering as they absorbed information directly through specialized membranes. Behind them, 3 Corthan students, each the size of a small transport vehicle, squeezed into reinforced seating that still creaked ominously whenever they shifted. A cluster of Pralaxian students hovered near the ceiling, their gas-based biology allowing them to float freely while their translation devices converted Velkrin's lectures into chemical signatures they could understand. And then there were the humans, 5 of them clustered together in the middle rows, suspiciously quiet, suspiciously attentive. Velkrin had learned to worry when humans got quiet. They had been scribbling notes for the past hour, actually using physical writing implements like some kind of historical reenactment enthusiasts. One of them, a male with dark hair and an expression of intense concentration, kept nodding along as if everything Velkrin said made perfect sense. Another, a female with bright red hair tied back in a practical knot, had filled an entire notebook and started on a second. This was unusual. Humans typically interrupted lectures with questions. Constant, unending questions. Why this? How that? What if we tried the other thing? It drove most professors to the edge of sanity. Silence from humans meant they were planning something. Velkrin pushed the thought aside and continued his lecture. Today's topic was one of his favorites, the fundamental impossibility of gravity manipulation. He pulled up a new set of equations, letting them cascade across the holographic display in elegant mathematical precision. As you can clearly observe, Velkrin announced, his voice carrying that particular tone of academic superiority that came from knowing he was absolutely unquestionably correct. The manipulation of gravitational fields requires energy expenditure that exceeds the total output of a standard star by a factor of 10 to the 16th power. This is not a technological limitation, students. This is a universal constant. He paused for effect, one of his secondary appendages adjusting his teaching robes. The ancients themselves attempted gravity control during the Third Galactic Era. They possessed technology we can barely comprehend today. Their computational power exceeded our current capabilities by magnitudes we cannot even calculate. They built structures that still orbit dead stars, monuments to their brilliance, and yet even they concluded that gravity manipulation was fundamentally mathematically physically impossible. The energy requirements alone would require converting the entire mass of a small moon into pure energy, and even then, you would achieve only localized field variance of 0.003%. The Zethrians shimmered in agreement. The Corthans rumbled their approval. The Pralaxians released small puffs of confirmatory gases. The humans kept writing. Velkrin expanded the equations further. The curvature of spacetime is not a suggestion, it is a law. You cannot simply decide to ignore it. You cannot brute force your way through fundamental physics. Every species that has ever existed has accepted this truth. Every civilization that has reached the stars has understood that some things are simply beyond our reach, not because we lack the will or the intelligence, but because the universe itself says no. He looked directly at the human section of the class. This is why gravity plating on starships uses rotational artificial gravity. This is why our stations spin. This is why we build within the laws of physics rather than futilely attempting to break them. Understanding our limitations is the mark of an advanced civilization. One of the humans, the male with dark hair, raised his hand. Velkrin's tertiary heart skipped a beat. Yes, student Jake. Jake stood up slowly, which was already a bad sign. Humans who stood up were humans who had committed to whatever insanity they were about to propose. Professor Velkrin, sir, with all due respect, Jake began, and Velkrin's primary brain immediately registered the phrase "with all due respect" as a threat indicator. I think there might be a small error in your calculations. The lecture hall went silent. Not the normal kind of silence. This was the kind of silence that happened right before someone said something catastrophically stupid. The kind of silence that preceded academic disasters and interdepartmental incidents. As Ethrian in the front row actually stopped shimmering entirely, which was their species' equivalent of a dramatic gasp. Velkrin's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement or possibly the early stages of an aneurysm. A small error, he repeated slowly, each word carefully enunciated, in calculations that have been verified by the finest minds across 12,000 star systems over the course of 47,000 years. Yes, sir, Jake said, with the kind of polite cheerfulness that made Velkrin want to retire immediately. See, the thing is, we've actually managed to make it work. One of the Korthan students made a sound like a rock slide having a philosophical crisis. You have, Velkrin said flatly, made gravity manipulation work. Well, not me personally, Jake clarified as if that made it better. But yeah, we've got a working prototype. Actually, we've got a couple of them now. Third generation is way more stable than the first batch. Those had some, issues. The red-haired human Cassidy snorted. Issues, he says. Jake, the first one created a gravity spike that made your dorm room ceiling become the floor for 6 hours. It was a learning experience, Jake replied defensively. Velkrin felt a migraine forming in his primary consciousness center. You are telling me in front of this entire class that you, a third-year undergraduate student, have solved a problem that has stumped the greatest scientific minds in galactic history. I mean, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of arrogant, Jake admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. But yeah. Basically, the lecture hall erupted. Zethrians were shimmering so violently they looked like disco balls. The Korthans were rumbling disagreement in frequencies that made the floor vibrate. The Prelaxians were releasing clouds of what Velkrin's translator interpreted as expressions of disbelief mixed with second-hand embarrassment. Velkrin raised an appendage for silence. This was it. This was his moment to crush this human's absurd claims with the weight of established science. To demonstrate why theoretical knowledge mattered. To show these students why we did not simply experiment randomly with fundamental forces. Student Jake, he said with icy precision. I assume you can demonstrate this miraculous achievement. Oh, absolutely, Jake said, grinning. We brought the equipment with us. Can we set up after class? It'll only take like 15 minutes. Velkrin's smile would have terrified a lesser species. By all means, I am quite eager to see this. Class ended 17 minutes later. But nobody left. Word had spread through the student network with the speed of gossip traveling through a space station, which was to say, faster than light communications could manage. Students from other departments started filtering in. A few professors poked their heads through the doorway. Someone had apparently started a betting pool. Velkrin settled into his observation position at the front of the hall. All 4 appendages crossed in a posture of supreme confidence. This was going to be educational. Not for him, of course. But for these students who clearly needed a lesson in academic humility. The 3 humans, Jake, Cassidy and a third one named Leon, who had been silent the entire lecture, were hauling equipment out of bags that looked like they had survived a war. Is that? One of the Zethrians whispered to its neighbor. Is that held together with adhesive tape? I believe the humans call it duct tape, the other replied. They use it for everything. Structural repairs, medical emergencies, fashion statements. That cannot possibly be safe. Safety is a very flexible concept for humans. Velkrin watched as the humans assembled what could generously be called a device, and more accurately be called a collection of spare parts that had been bullied into cooperation. There were power cells that looked like they had been salvaged from old data pads, wiring that appeared to be at least 3 different colors for no discernible reason. A central module that was definitely unmistakably held together with the aforementioned duct tape. Leon was connecting cables while humming something that Velkrin's translator refused to process. Cassidy was calibrating what appeared to be a control interface made from a gutted gaming console. Jake was reading instructions off his datapad, occasionally saying things like, huh, that's weird, and oh right, we fixed that part. A Korthan professor who had wandered in leaned toward Velkrin. 5 credits says it explodes, he rumbled. I am not taking that bet. Velkrin replied. I am, however, drafting the incident report in my head right now. Think they will require medical attention? Humans always require medical attention. It is their natural state. The humans, oblivious to or ignoring the commentary, continued their setup. Cassidy smacked the side of the main unit twice, which apparently passed for advanced calibration in human engineering circles. Okay, Jake announced cheerfully. We're ready. Velkrin gestured magnanimously. Please proceed with your demonstration. I can hardly wait. The sarcasm was so thick you could have used it for hull plating. Jake positioned himself next to the contraption like a game show host presenting a prize. Alright, so, here's the thing. The entire reason everyone thinks gravity manipulation is impossible is because they are approaching it from the wrong angle. Velcrin resisted the urge to laugh out loud. The wrong angle. 47,000 years of research and apparently everyone had just been standing incorrectly. See, all the math says you need ridiculous amounts of energy to affect space-time curvature directly. Jake continued, gesturing at the equation still floating in the air from Velcrin's lecture. And that is totally true. You do need that much energy if you are trying to brute force it. Fascinating, Velcrin said dryly. And you have discovered a method that does not require brute force. Exactly, Jake said, completely missing the sarcasm. We are not pushing against space-time. We are just sort of asking it nicely to move. Leon nodded seriously. Quantum politeness field theory. That is not a real thing. A Zethrian student said weakly. It is now, Cassidy replied, flipping switches on her jury-rigged control panel. Okay, firing up the graviton resonance chamber. Everyone might want to step back like 3 feet. Just in case. Just in case of what, Velcrin wanted to ask. But he was committed to his role as the dignified professor watching students learn through failure. He did, however, take 4 steps back instead of 3. The device hummed to life with all the dramatic flair of a particularly bored refrigerator. A few lights blinked. Something inside went whir click whir. There was a faint smell of ozone and what Velcrin suspected might be burning insulation. Resonance chamber at 15%. Leanne called out, monitoring a display that looked like it had been stolen from a museum. Quantum fluctuation patterns holding steady. We are getting good coherence. Bump it to 30%, Jake said. Let's start small. Cassidy adjusted a dial that was literally labeled with handwritten numbers on a piece of tape. The humming increased in pitch slightly, though it still sounded less like advanced physics, and more like someone's old ground transport refusing to start on a cold morning. Nothing happened. Velcrin felt a wave of satisfaction wash over him. Of course nothing was happening. Of course this was a failure. The universe made sense again. He opened his mouth to deliver a gentle educational speech about the importance of theoretical foundations. Then Cassidy's pen floated off the control panel, just lifted straight up into the air, rotating slowly, hanging there about 2 feet off the ground in clear defiance of the station's gravity plating. The lecture hall went dead silent. There we go, Jake said happily. Okay, good start. Leon, how are the field parameters looking? Stable, Leon replied, sounding almost disappointed that nothing had exploded. We have got a clean gravitational gradient, no fluctuations, minimal energy bleed, running at like 12 watts. 12 watts. The pen was floating in midair, completely ignoring gravity, and they were using 12 watts. Velcrin's personal data pad used more power than that. That is a magnetic field, Velcrin said firmly, his voice only slightly strained. You have created a magnetic field and are levitating a ferromagnetic object. Cassidy picked up a plastic cup from the desk and tossed it into the field. It stopped in midair next to the pen, bobbing gently. Okay. Magnetic field levitating plastic. Velcrin tried again. Static electricity, perhaps. Leon lobbed a rubber ball into the zone. It joined the floating collection, drifting in lazy circles. There are wires, Velcrin declared. Invisible wires. Monofilament suspension. Jake walked over and stuck his entire hand into the field. His arm from the elbow down just hung there at a 45-degree angle, pulled gently upward by forces that absolutely categorically should not exist. No wires, Professor, Jake said, waving his suspended arm around. Just good old-fashioned gravity manipulation. Well, technically it is gravity field inversion with a localized space-time metric adjustment. But we are still working on the proper terminology. He said it the way someone might discuss their weekend gardening project. A Corthan student made a noise like tectonic plates having an existential crisis. Velcrin stared at the floating objects, his mind racing through every possible explanation, every potential trick, every conceivable way this could be anything other than what it appeared to be. His calculations were very clear. This was impossible. The pen, floating in front of him, disagreed. Okay. So that is the basic field inversion, Jake said, pulling his arm out of the floating zone. Pretty simple stuff. Leon, want to show them the fun part? On it, Leon said, turning a knob that had been labeled, inexplicably with a smiley face sticker. Increasing field strength to 60%. Expanding radius to 3 meters. The humming grew slightly louder, though it still sounded less like cutting-edge physics and more like someone's appliance having a mild complaint. Every unsecured object within 3 meters of the device gently lifted off the ground. Data pads, styluses, a forgotten sandwich wrapper, someone's jacket, a Zethrian's notes tablet. All of it just rose into the air like gravity had politely excused itself from the room. A Pralaxian student who had been hovering nearby suddenly found themselves pushed upward toward the ceiling, flailing in surprise. "Sorry," Jake called up. "You might want to move over a bit. The field does not distinguish between objects and gas-based life forms." Velcrin watched his own lecture notes drift past his face. He grabbed them reflexively, holding them down through sheer force of will and mounting panic. "Materials test," Cassidy announced, pulling out a sandwich from somewhere and taking a bite. She spoke around a mouthful of what Velcrin's translator identified as processed meat and vegetable matter. "We have got plastic, metal, organic compounds, silicon-based materials all floating just fine. No discrimination based on atomic structure or molecular composition." She adjusted a slider with her free hand while chewing, demonstrating the kind of casual confidence that came from either brilliance or spectacular ignorance of danger. Velcrin was no longer sure which. "The field strength is not dependent on mass either," she continued, swallowing. "That ball weighs 15 grams. That jacket weighs about 800 grams. Both experiencing the same gravitational cancellation. Perfect uniform field propagation." "But that violates," Velcrin started, then stopped because his voice had gone up an octave and he refused to sound hysterical in front of students. He cleared his throat chambers. "That violates the principle of equivalence." "Does it though?" Jake asked with genuine curiosity. "Because we are not actually changing the mass. We are just inverting the local space-time gradient. The equivalence principle still holds. We have just flipped which direction counts as down." A Corthan professor who had been watching from the doorway sat down heavily on the floor, which made the entire room shake. "All right, next demo," Leon announced. "Localized gravity well generation. This is my personal favorite." He pressed a series of buttons on his salvage display. The floating objects suddenly stopped drifting randomly and began moving with purpose, all of them spiraling inward toward the central device. Within seconds they were orbiting the machine in a perfect circle around and around like a miniature solar system. "We have created a gravitational attraction point," Leon explained, sounding far too pleased with himself. "Not a black hole, obviously. That would be bad. Just a localized increase in space-time curvature sufficient to create stable orbital mechanics. The pen is currently experiencing 0.04 standard gravities of attraction. The ball is in a higher orbit experiencing 0.02 gravities." "You built a tiny star," whispered a SCIFI student. "I mean, a star does fusion and radiation and stuff," Jake said. "This is way simpler. We are just bending space a little bit." "Just bending space." Casually, with duct tape and gaming console parts. Velcrin's entire understanding of physics was developing stress fractures. "Now watch this," Cassidy said, still eating her sandwich with one hand while operating universe-breaking technology with the other. She flipped a switch labeled up ? The orbiting objects stopped. Then they fell upward, not floating, not drifting, falling, with acceleration, toward the ceiling. The pen hit the ceiling tiles with a small click. The ball bounced off and fell upward again. The jacket plastered itself against the ceiling like gravity had rotated 90 degrees and then decided to get aggressive about it. "Directional gravity projection," Cassidy announced proudly. "We can make down go any direction we want. Up, sideways, diagonal, whatever. That switch there does sideways left. That one does sort of diagonal forward. We have not labeled them all yet." "How?" Velcrin croaked. "How are you powering this?" Leon held up a power cell. A standard, commercial, available at any station power cell, the kind students use to charge their data pads. "2 of these," he said, "running in parallel. Total output of about 50 watts continuous. We have been running for," he checked his chronometer, 8 minutes now, and we are at 73% charge remaining." "That is impossible," Velcrin said. "The energy requirements alone. The calculations are absolute. The math does not lie." "The math is probably fine," Jake said reassuringly. "We are just cheating." "You cannot cheat physics." "Sure you can," Cassidy said, wiping sandwich crumbs off the control panel. "Physics has loopholes like everything else. You just have to find them. This whole setup cost us maybe 200 credits in parts. Most of it we pulled from the recycling center. The resonance chamber is made from old comm relay components. The field projector is a modified sensor array. The control system is literally a gaming console that Leon's roommate threw away." She gestured at the device with her sandwich. "We built a gravity manipulation device out of garbage, and it works." "So? Just to be clear," Velcrin said, his voice remarkably steady considering his worldview was actively collapsing. "You built this device, which violates everything we know about gravitational physics, As what exactly? A class assignment? Oh no, Jake said brightly. This was just a hobby thing. We got bored during summer break back on Earth. Summer break. They had rewritten the fundamental laws of physics because they were bored. We actually started with a much simpler design, Leon added helpfully. The first prototype was way more basic. Just a straight gravitational field disruptor. We were trying to make a hoverboard. Honestly, did it work? A Zethrian student asked, morbid curiosity overwhelming their shock. Define work, Cassidy said. It hovered. Also, it created a feedback loop that launched Jake through his garage roof. 17 feet straight up, Jake confirmed. Broke 3 ribs in my collarbone. Totally worth it though, because that is when we figured out the field coherence problem. Velcrin made a sound that did not translate into any known language. The second version was better, Leon continued. More stable field generation, better control interfaces, way less chance of spontaneous disassembly. Spontaneous disassembly, Velcrin repeated. Explosions, Cassidy translated. He means explosions. The first one exploded, very excitingly. Took out a whole shed. But version 2 only caught fire a little bit, Jake said defensively. And nobody got hurt that time. This is version 3, Velcrin asked weakly. Version 3.5 technically, Leon said. We have made some improvements since we got to the Institute. Better power efficiency, tighter field control, added the directional projection system. Oh, and we fixed that bug where it would randomly reverse gravity for everything within 20 meters. That was a bug. A Corthan student rumbled. Not a feature. Definitely a bug. All 3 humans said in unison. Velcrin's secondary brain was trying to process something. Wait, you said this was a hobby project. Are there other humans doing this?
Oh yeah,
Jake said casually. Tons. I mean, we posted our schematics on the public network and there are like 40 different research groups working on variations now. University of New Tokyo has a version that can create artificial gravity in zero-G environments. The Munich Institute built one into a personal transport vehicle. Some kid in Brazil made a gravity surfboard that actually works. A gravity surfboard, Velcrin said. For surfing on gravity waves, Cassidy explained as if that clarified anything. You know, for fun. And the theoretical framework for all this? Velcrin demanded, grasping at the last threads of academic dignity. Surely you have published papers, peer-reviewed research, mathematical proofs. Jake looked at Leon. Leon looked at Cassidy. Cassidy shrugged. We kind of just tried stuff until it worked, Jake admitted. The lecture hall went so quiet you could have heard a quantum particle decay. You tried stuff, Velcrin said. Yeah, experimental approach. We had a basic idea about quantum fluctuation patterns in space-time foam. So we built a field generator that could manipulate those fluctuations, tested different configurations, adjusted parameters based on results, and eventually found a combination that produced stable gravity manipulation. That is not science, Velcrin protested. That is just random experimentation. I mean, we took notes, Leon offered. Pretty detailed ones. We have got like 6 notebooks full of observations and test results. We wrote down what worked and what exploded, Cassidy added. Very scientific, but the mathematics, the theoretical foundation, the predictive models. Velcrin was aware he sounded desperate and did not care anymore. Math is hard, Jake said simply. Building stuff is easier. We figured we would let the physicist work out the math after we proved it was possible. You know, give them something to do. Give them something to do. They had casually demolished 47,000 years of established physics to give theoretical physicists something to do. Velcrin sat down, all 4 appendages trembling slightly. You people are insane, he whispered. Yeah, all 3 humans agreed cheerfully. We get that a lot. The next 15 minutes were chaos. 3 more professors burst through the door, followed by what appeared to be half the physics department and a very concerned security officer who kept asking if anyone had filed the proper experimental permits. Professor Thendricks, head of the theoretical physics department, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns that indicated extreme distress, pushed her way to the front. Someone explain to me right now why my office instruments are detecting gravitational anomalies in this sector. The humans broke physics, a Corthan student said helpfully. They did not break physics, Velcrin said automatically, then paused. Actually, I am no longer certain of that statement. Professor Thendricks looked at the objects still floating in midair, then at the ceiling where the jacket remained plastered, then at the device held together with duct tape and hope. Her form flickered through several colors that Velcrin's translator unhelpfully labeled as confusion mixed with rage, mixed with wonder, mixed with the desire to retire immediately. This is not possible, she stated. That is what I said, Velkrin replied. And yet, she gestured at the floating pen. And yet, Velkrin agreed miserably. Dr. Korash from the Engineering Ethics Committee arrived, breathing heavily from what must have been a sprint across 3 sectors. Is someone conducting unauthorized gravitational experiments? Because those are specifically prohibited under Institute Safety Protocol 7-4-. He stopped mid-sentence as a datapad drifted past his head. Should we classify this as illegal or impossible? Professor Thendrix asked. Because I am genuinely unsure which category applies. Both, Dr. Koresh said weakly. Definitely both. Actually, Jake interjected. We filed all the proper paperwork for experimental demonstrations. Got it approved last week. Form P777B. Application for classroom technology display. He held up his datapad showing the approved permit. You filed a permit to break the laws of physics? Velkrin asked incredulously. We filed a permit for educational demonstration of alternative gravity manipulation techniques, Jake corrected. The form did not have a specific checkbox for rewriting fundamental universal constants. We are going to need to confiscate this device, Dr. Korash announced, for safety analysis, and probably to prevent widespread panic, and possibly to lock in a vault and never speak of it again. Oh, you do not need to do that, Cassidy said helpfully. The plans are already public. We uploaded them to the open source science repository 3 months ago. Anyone can build one. The professor stared at her. You what? Professor Thendrix managed. Open source, Leon repeated slowly, as if talking to children. Free access. Creative Commons licensing. We are not trying to profit off this or anything. Science should be available to everyone. You have doomed us all, whispered a Zaxithrian professor who had just arrived. Velkrin looked at the 3 humans, who were now casually packing up their reality-defying device like students after any normal class demonstration. They had no idea, no concept of what they had just done. To them, this was just another project, just another interesting problem they had solved through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that something was impossible. They had not just broken the laws of physics, they had proven that everyone else had been thinking about the problem wrong for thousands of years. They had made the entire foundation of gravitational theory obsolete using spare parts and trial and error, and they were asking if this would affect their grade. Do we still pass the course? Jake asked, zipping up his bag. Because that lecture was really informative. Professor Velkrin learned a lot about the traditional approaches. As if there were now multiple valid approaches to gravity manipulation, traditional and human, which, Velkrin realized with creeping horror, there apparently were. 2 hours later, Velkrin sat alone in the empty lecture hall. The other professors had left, taking their existential crises with them. The students had dispersed, probably to spread word of what they had witnessed to every corner of the station. The humans had packed up their universe-breaking contraption and cheerfully headed off to their next class, completely oblivious to the academic apocalypse they had triggered. Velkrin stared at the holographic equation still floating in front of him, the elegant mathematics that proved beyond any doubt that gravity manipulation was impossible. Thousands of years of research, the finest minds in galactic history, all of it rendered obsolete by 3 undergraduate students with duct tape and a refusal to accept basic reality. The worst part was not that they had proven him wrong. The worst part was how they had done it. No elegant theory, no beautiful mathematics, no carefully constructed framework of logical deduction. Just build something, see if it works. Adjust when it explodes. Try again. It was offensive to everything Velkrin believed about science. It was also apparently effective. He pulled up his lecture notes on his datapad. Chapter 7, Fundamental Impossibilities in Modern Physics. He scrolled through the sections. Gravity manipulation, faster than light travel, causality violation, zero-point energy extraction, all impossible, all proven impossible through rigorous mathematical analysis. His appendages hovered over the delete button. 347 cycles of teaching. 347 cycles of confidently explaining what could not be done, what would never be done, what the universe itself forbade. His datapad chimed. A message from Professor Yeneth in the engineering department. He almost did not open it. He was fairly certain he could not handle any more revelations today. He opened it anyway. Velkrin, need your input on something urgent. 3 human students in my applied engineering class just demonstrated what they are calling a quantum entanglement communication array. They are claiming real-time, faster-than-light data transmission with 0 lag across 50,000 kilometers. Before I have a complete mental breakdown, please tell me this is somehow fake. Please. Velkrin read the message 3 times, then he very calmly opened his personal files and pulled up his resume. It had not been updated in 200 cycles, probably needed some work. Maybe he could pivot to a career in historical research, something safe, something where the fundamental laws of the universe stayed consistent. He began typing. Professor Velkrin Tachar, 347 cycles of experience in theoretical physics, specializing in areas where humans have not yet gotten involved. He paused, then deleted that last part. At the rate they were going, there would not be any areas left.